There are two kinds of quiet in a man's house after his wife is gone. The kind that settles over the rooms at night, that one I had made peace with. 19 months of it had taught me its rhythms, which floorboards to avoid, which chair still smelled faintly of her hand cream, which hour of the evening was hardest, and which one, strangely, was easiest. But the other kind of quiet, the kind that comes from a phone that used to ring every Sunday and now doesn't, that one I was still learning. I was still learning it on the 4th of July, standing in my son's backyard in a shirt I'd ironed that morning for no one in particular, holding a paper plate of potato salad I wasn't going to eat, listening to my daughter-in-law tell a woman I'd never met that her father, not me, was coming to Thanksgiving this year because, and I'm quoting her exactly, things are just easier that way. I want to tell you my name and where I'm from, the way I do at the start of every one of these. My name is Walter Hines. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years installing and servicing elevators across the Pittsburgh metro area, the kind of job where if you do it wrong, someone falls 40 floors. So you learn to do everything right, slowly, and check it twice. My wife's name was Carol. She's been gone a year and 7 months now, and I still reach for her side of the bed some mornings before I remember. We have one son, Marcus, 34, a financial analyst, married 4 years to a woman named Vanessa. They have a daughter, my only grandchild, Josephine, who is 5 and calls me Pop Pop and is, without exaggeration, the single reason I still get up some mornings with anything resembling purpose. I'm telling you all of this first because I want you to understand exactly what I lost and exactly what I found before we get to the part where I disappeared. Where are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments, your city, your state, wherever this finds you. I read every single one, and it matters more than you'd think, hearing where these stories land. The backyard party on the 4th was not the beginning of anything. It was, I understand now, closer to the middle. The beginning had actually started 11 months earlier at Carol's memorial luncheon, when Vanessa had pulled me aside near the coat closet and told me, with the particular gentleness people use when they're about to say something unkind, that Marcus and she had been talking, and they thought it might be healthier for everyone if I found my own rhythm rather than expecting them to fold me into theirs quite so often. She used the word rhythm twice. I remember because it struck me as an odd word to use about grief. Like sorrow was a dance step you could simply learn to do alone in a different room. I said I understood. I did not understand. I said it anyway, because Carol had spent 39 years teaching me that the fastest way to lose an argument with someone you love is to be right about it too loudly. So I adjusted. I stopped calling on Wednesdays, which had been our standing day, because Vanessa mentioned once that Wednesdays were chaotic with Josephine's swim lessons. I started calling on Sundays instead, briefly, and kept the calls short, the way you learn to keep a visit short when you can feel the door wanting to close. I brought smaller gifts. I stopped bringing up Carol unless someone else brought her up first, because I noticed the room got tight and careful whenever I did, like everyone was waiting for me to stop. I became, without entirely meaning to, a smaller version of a father, taking up less air in every room I was allowed into. I want to tell you about the dollhouse before I tell you anything else, because it matters later, and because it's the last good, uncomplicated thing that happened before everything else started. I built it over the winter. Carol had always been the one with the eye for detail she used to needlepoint. Beautiful, careful work, birds and vines, and once, for my 40th birthday, an entire scene of the elevator shaft at the Fisher Building because she thought it was funny. My whole career reduced to thread. I don't have her eye. What I have is 31 years of knowing how things fit together, how a joint holds weight, how to measure twice. I built Josephine a dollhouse in my garage across 4 months, working most evenings after supper, 3 stories, hinged front panel, real tiny hardwood floors I'd cut and sanded and stained myself, little copper light fixtures I wired to actually work off 2 AA batteries hidden under the base. I put a miniature portrait on the wall of the little parlor room, hand-painted, of a woman with gray-streaked dark hair or a cardigan the same shade of green Carol used to wear. Josephine didn't know why. She just knew she liked the lady in the picture, and she named her Grandma Painting, which is a name I have never once said out loud to anyone without my throat closing up a little. I finished it in March and drove it over on a Saturday, wrapped in an old moving blanket in the bed of my truck, secured with bungee cords, like I was transporting something from a museum, which to me, I suppose, it was. Josephine's face when I pulled that blanket back is a thing I will keep until I die, she screamed. Not a scared scream, the other kind. The kind that comes out of a 5-year-old when the world briefly exceeds what she believed it capable of. She ran her fingers along the little roof shingles I'd cut individually from cedar shims. She found the lights and gasped audibly when they came on. She asked, with total seriousness, if the lady in the painting was going to come alive at night, and I told her no, sweetheart, but she watches over the house, which felt true enough to say. Vanessa stood in the doorway of Josephine's room with her arms crossed and said it was very impressive, in a tone that made the word impressive sound like a diagnosis. Marcus said, "You didn't have to go to all that trouble, Dad," which is a sentence I have come to understand, over the years, is what people say when trouble is exactly the thing they wish you hadn't gone to. I told him it wasn't any trouble at all. That part, at least, was true. Here's where the story actually turns, and I want to walk you through it slowly. Because it happens slowly, the way real damage usually does not in one dramatic evening, but in 100 small ones that only add up to something when you finally stop and count them. 3 weeks after I delivered the dollhouse, Marcus called me on a Tuesday, which was unusual enough that I knew before he said a word that something had shifted. He asked if I had a few minutes to talk business, which is a phrase my son had never once used with me in 34 years, because until 18 months prior, my son had shown roughly the same interest in my finances as I'd shown in his fantasy football league, which is to say none at all. What he wanted to talk about was my house. The house on Larkspur Lane, 4 bedrooms, brick colonial, the one Carol and I bought in 1994 with money I'd saved installing elevators in the old Alcoa building downtown, the one where Marcus grew up, the one where Carol died in the front bedroom with the morning light coming through the curtains she'd sewn herself. Paid off free and clear in 2019, 3 years before she got sick. Worth, according to the county assessor, somewhere around $410,000, though Vanessa, I would later learn, had gotten it independently appraised at $460,000. Marcus said, and I want to get this close to exact, because I wrote it down that same night at my kitchen table, the way I write everything down now, a habit I picked up somewhere in this whole ordeal and never put back down. Marcus said, "Dad, you're rattling around in that house all by yourself. It's 4 bedrooms for one person. Vanessa and I have been talking, and we think it might make more sense, financially and otherwise, if you considered downsizing. There's a nice senior community out in Cranberry, 1-level living, no stairs, no yard work. And honestly, it would free up some equity that could really help set Josephine up down the road. College is only getting more expensive." I asked him, evenly, whether he was asking me to sell my house so that money currently sitting quietly in a piece of real estate could instead sit quietly in a college fund 13 years from now. He said it wasn't about the money, it was about quality of life. Mine specifically, though he had a difficult time meeting my eyes on the video call while he said it. I told him I'd think about it. I did not tell him that Carol's ashes were in a cedar box on the top shelf of the front bedroom closet because I hadn't yet decided where to scatter them, and the idea of some stranger's real estate agent walking through that closet with a clipboard made something close up hard and tight behind my ribs. I want to pause the story here and tell you something I've come to understand only in looking back on it, the way you sometimes only see the shape of a storm once you're standing outside of it. What was happening to me was not, I don't believe, born out of cruelty. Vanessa is not a cruel person, not exactly. What was happening was something quieter and, in its way, more dangerous than cruelty. It was arithmetic. I had become, in the eyes of my son's household, a number on a balance sheet. An asset with an inconvenient amount of sentiment attached to it. And once a person becomes a number to you, it becomes remarkably easy to make decisions about them the way you'd make decisions about any other number, for maximum efficiency, minimum waste. The pressure didn't stop after that call. It found new shapes. A cousin of Vanessa's, a realtor, happened to be in the neighborhood and stopped by, unannounced, with a folder of comparable listings in Cranberry. Marcus started forwarding me articles with subject lines like, "Thought this might interest you, Dad," about the hidden dangers of stairs for seniors, about the tax benefits of gifting real estate early, about generational wealth transfer strategies, which is a phrase I had genuinely never heard before that spring, and have now heard more times than I can count. And through all of it, Josephine's visits got shorter. Sundays became every other Sunday. Every other Sunday became, "We'll try for next month, Dad. Things are just so busy right now." I noticed, the way you notice a draft in a house before you find where it's coming from, that the closer I got to my son's family financially, the more useful, the more liquid, if you'll forgive the word, the further I seemed to get from them personally. The night everything actually broke was the last Sunday in September, at a dinner Vanessa had organized at their house, ostensibly to celebrate Josephine starting kindergarten. I arrived at 6 with a gift for Josephine, a leather-bound sketchbook, and a good set of colored pencils, because she'd started drawing everything in sight and I wanted to encourage it. I was seated, I noticed as I came in, not at the dining table with Marcus and Vanessa's parents, who were visiting from Ohio, but at a smaller card table set up near the kitchen doorway, angled slightly away from the main conversation. Vanessa explained, touching my forearm lightly the way you'd reassure a nervous animal, that the dining table only sat 6 comfortably, and her parents were only in town this one weekend, so she'd thought I wouldn't mind the cozier setup, closer to the kitchen, so you can help yourself to seconds easier. I did not mind, out loud. I minded a great deal, quietly, in the particular way. A man minds something he has trained himself for 39 years of marriage and 34 years of fatherhood not to make a scene about. Josephine tore into her gift the moment she saw it, delighted, and immediately began sketching the dollhouse from memory at the table, narrating each line to me under her breath the way children do when they've decided you're the safe adult in the room. Vanessa's father, a big, genial, oblivious man named Roger, leaned over at some point during the main course and asked, not unkindly, just conversationally, whether I was still in that big old house on my own, or had I finally wised up and looked at one of those retirement places. I said I was still on Larkspur Lane and that I liked it there. Roger said, with the easy confidence of a man repeating something he'd clearly heard from his daughter, that it seemed like an awful lot of house and an awful lot of upkeep costs for one old man when there were grandkids who could use the help. I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold, the way it does right before you say something you can't take back. I didn't say anything. What I did instead was worse. In its own way, I looked over at Marcus, my son, waiting for him to say something, anything. In my defense, the way I had defended him 1,000 times as a boy on 100 different playgrounds. Marcus looked down at his plate and moved a piece of chicken around it and said nothing at all. That silence told me everything the last 18 months of small slights had been building toward. My son was not going to protect me. My son had, somewhere along the way, quietly decided that keeping the peace with his wife's family cost less than defending his father's dignity. And he had made that calculation, I believe, without even fully realizing he'd made it. That's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it. It wasn't malice. It was just easier. Josephine, 5 years old, watching all of this with the frightening perceptiveness children have before adults teach it out of them, looked up from her sketchbook and said, into the silence, "Pop's house has my dollhouse's big sister in it," which is not a sentence that means anything except that a 5-year-old had somehow understood, better than any of the adults at that table, that my house held something worth keeping. I stayed until dessert out of a stubbornness that had nothing left to do with wanting to be there. I hugged Josephine goodbye at the door and told her I loved her drawings and I'd see her soon. I did not hug Vanessa. I shook Marcus's hand at the door, which we had never once done in his entire life, not at his college graduation, not at his wedding, and something in his face flickered when I did it, some recognition that a door had just been quietly and permanently closed between us, but he didn't say anything to stop it, and neither did I. I drove home to Larkspur Lane in the dark, and I sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside, and I thought about Carol and what she would have said, and I knew exactly what she would have said, because Carol never once, in 39 years, let anyone make her feel like a line item, and she would not have let anyone do it to me either, if she'd still been here to stop it. That night, I made a decision. Not the decision you're probably imagining yet, something quieter than that, and, I've come to believe, far more useful. I didn't sell my house in anger. I didn't call Marcus and unload 34 years of accumulated silence on him, satisfying as that might have felt for exactly as long as the phone call lasted. What I did instead was sit at my kitchen table with a legal pad, the same table where Carol used to do the crossword every Sunday morning, and I started writing things down. Every comment, every rescheduled visit, every mention of the house, the equity, the college fund, the senior community in Cranberry. I dated each entry. I remind you, a man who spent 31 years documenting elevator inspections because a missed detail could cost someone their life. Documentation is simply how I think. And somewhere in that process, going back through 18 months of small cruelties laid end to end on paper, I understood something I hadn't let myself see clearly before. This had never really been about my quality of life, or the stairs, or Josephine's college fund. This was about the house, specifically about what the house was worth, and who stood to benefit from it being worth that to someone other than me. I called my late wife's cousin the following week. Her name is Denise, and she's a real estate attorney out of Erie, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who returns your call within the hour and tells you exactly what she thinks, whether you want to hear it or not. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long moment on the phone, and then she asked me a question that changed the entire shape of what came next. She asked whether Marcus or Vanessa had access to any of my accounts, any power of attorney documents, anything with my signature on it that I might not clearly remember signing. I told her no, absolutely not. I'd never signed anything like that. She asked me to check anyway, just to be sure. It took me 4 days of going through file boxes in the basement to find it a document from the previous spring, back when Carol was still declining and I was not, I'll admit, thinking as clearly as I should have been. Vanessa had brought it by one evening, along with a stack of what she called just some routine estate planning paperwork, so things are easier down the road, for everyone. I remembered signing something. I did not remember, because I had not been given the chance to remember, that buried on page 4 of an 11-page document was a durable power of attorney, naming Marcus as my agent, with what Denise later told me was unusually broad language that, upon Marcus's discretion, would allow him to sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of real property on my behalf. I sat in my basement with that document in my hands for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering you at this point in the story. I did not feel rage, not exactly, not the hot kind you'd expect. I felt something colder and more clarifying than that. I felt the way I used to feel on a job site when I found a load-bearing beam that had been quietly compromised, not angry at the beam, just very, very aware of exactly how much weight it could no longer be trusted to hold. Denise walked me through it slowly over the following weeks. The document, as written, was likely valid. I had signed it, after all, even if I hadn't fully understood the page it was buried on, and courts are generally reluctant to void a signature just because someone didn't read carefully enough. But it was revocable. Any competent adult, at any time, for any reason, can revoke a power of attorney and execute a new one. It takes a single signature and a notary, and it takes effect immediately. I revoked it on a Thursday morning in October, in Denise's office in Erie, 90 minutes from my house, far enough that no one back in Pittsburgh would happen to see my truck parked outside a law office and start asking questions before I was ready for them. I named Denise herself as my new agent, and then, because I had spent 39 years learning patience from a woman who did needlepoint one careful stitch at a time rather than tearing through the fabric, I did not call Marcus to tell him what I'd done. I simply waited, and I watched, and I let the next several weeks tell me the rest of what I needed to know. I didn't have to wait long. 3 weeks later, Marcus called, and this time there was an edge in his voice I'd never heard directed at me before, something between confusion and panic. He said Vanessa had been trying to move forward on some paperwork for the house, and there was some kind of issue with the notary, and did I know anything about it? I asked him calmly what exactly they'd been trying to move forward on. There was a long pause on the line, and then he told me carefully, the way you tell someone something you already suspect they won't like hearing, that they'd been in talks with a developer interested in the Larkspur Lane lot, that the house itself would likely be torn down for a modern build, that the number being discussed was well above market, north of 500,000, and that a portion of that, once finalized, was meant to go toward securing Josephine's future. With the rest, he said, going toward helping me get settled somewhere more manageable. I asked him one simple question. I asked him when, exactly, he had planned on telling me that my house, the house I still lived in, the house where his mother had died, was already being shopped around to developers. He didn't have a good answer for that. He had, it turned out, no answer at all, just a long silence on the other end of the line that told me everything the dinner table silence in September had already started telling me. I told him I needed some time to think, and I hung up, and I sat at my kitchen table with Carol's crossword pen still in the little cup where she used to keep it, and I made the decision that actually changes this story from a sad one into something else entirely. I decided I was going to disappear. Not forever. Not out of spite, though I understood by then exactly how much spite I was entitled to. I decided I was going to give my son and his wife precisely what they seemed to want most, a version of me that took up no space at all, and let them discover, entirely on their own, exactly what that would cost them. I sold the house myself, through Denise, to a young family with 2 kids who cried actual tears of gratitude when I knocked $5,000 off my own asking price because I liked the way the little boy looked at the treehouse in the backyard I'd built for Marcus. 30 years earlier, I told them the house held good memories, and I hoped they'd make some of their own in it. The closing took 6 weeks. I never told Marcus or Vanessa it was happening. I told them, when they asked, only that I was considering my options, which was, in a narrow legal sense, entirely true. I packed up 31 years of a life into a moving truck and a storage unit outside Erie, keeping only what mattered: Carol's needlepoint pieces, her cedar box, 4 boxes of tools, and, wrapped carefully in the same moving blanket I'd used to deliver it, the dollhouse's twin, a second one I'd secretly begun building back in April, the week after that first uncomfortable phone call about downsizing, because some part of me, even then, he had known where this was heading before my head caught up with my gut. And then I bought a one-way bus ticket to a small town on the Gulf Coast of Alabama, a place called Fairhope that Carol and I had visited exactly once, on our 25th anniversary, and had talked about retiring to every year since without ever quite getting around to it. I rented a small house 2 blocks from the water. I scattered her ashes off the municipal pier on a Tuesday morning in November, alone, the way I think she would have actually wanted it. No ceremony, just me and the water and the gulls, and 39 years of a marriage, finally, gently, let go. I did not tell Marcus where I'd gone. I left him a single letter, mailed the same week I left, no return address, that said only that I loved him, that I loved Josephine more than I had words for, that I had learned some difficult things over the past year about what my presence in his life was actually worth to the people around him, and that I needed some time and some distance to figure out what came next. I told him Denise had my current information if there was ever a genuine emergency, and I asked him, gently, not to try to find me otherwise. I want to tell you what the next 4 months looked like, because I think this is the part of the story people forget to imagine, not the leaving, but the after. I built things again. I found a workshop space above a boat repair garage 2 streets back from the water, run by a man named Isaiah, a retired Coast Guard machinist, about my age, with a laugh like a foghorn, who took one look at the dollhouse I hauled in, wrapped in a moving blanket, and asked, with genuine respect, who'd taught me joinery like that. I told him 31 years of elevator mechanics teaches you a few things about how weight moves through wood and metal whether you plan on it or not. We became friends the way men our age become friends, slowly, over shared work, without needing to say much about why either of us was really there. I started building dollhouses to sell, actually, small custom ones, through a little shop on Main Street that took them on consignment. Word got around. By January, I had a waiting list. There is something I hadn't expected in making something beautiful for a stranger's grandchild after making the same thing twice. For my own, a kind of quiet repair happening in my hands, even when I wasn't thinking about it happening at all. I made friends at a Tuesday night dinner club for widowers that Isaiah dragged me to, kicking and grumbling, in December, and found, to my genuine surprise, that grief shared out loud among men who understood it without needing it, explained weighed less than grief, carried alone in a house, getting quietly appraised behind your back. And I waited, not anxiously. Denise kept me updated every few weeks, and what she told me, slowly, over that winter, was this. The sale of Larkspur Lane, once it became public record, Once Marcus and Vanessa discovered through the county registry, rather than through me, that the house had already changed hands months before at a price I'd set myself, with none of the proceeds going anywhere near a developer's pocket or a Cranberry retirement community, that discovery landed on them like a structural failure they hadn't seen coming, precisely because they had never once considered that the number on the balance sheet might simply decide to walk away and take himself off the ledger entirely. Marcus called Denise's office 11 times in December. She didn't tell him where I was, because I'd asked her not to, but she did, at my request, forward him one thing: a copy of the revoked power of attorney, dated back in October, 3 weeks before that phone call about the developer, so that he would understand, with total clarity, exactly when I had stopped trusting him with my future, and exactly why. I got a letter back from him in February, forwarded through Denise's office. No return address requested, just written out longhand on notebook paper, in a way I hadn't seen my son write since he was in college. I'm not going to tell you everything it said, because some things a father keeps for himself, but I'll tell you the parts that mattered. He said he hadn't understood, until the house was already gone, how much of what had happened over the previous 18 months had actually been his failure to say a single word in my defense. At that table, in September, and every quiet moment before it, he said Vanessa's father's comment about the house had sat wrong in his stomach all through dinner, and he still hadn't said anything, and he didn't have a good reason why, except that it had felt, in the moment, easier to let it pass than to make things uncomfortable. And he understood now, far too late, that easier had cost him something he couldn't easily get back. He said Josephine asked about me every single week. He said she still called the first dollhouse the big sister house, and had started leaving small drawings for me on the little kitchen table inside it, drawings of a truck, of a beach, of what she called Pop Pop's boat, which confused him until he remembered I'd once told her about a fishing boat Carol and I had rented one summer in Fairhope decades earlier. A detail I hadn't realized had lodged itself so deeply in a 5-year-old's imagination. I wrote him back. I told him I forgave him, because I did, mostly, and because Carol had spent 39 years teaching me that holding a grudge is its own kind of load-bearing beam, and eventually it buckles under you if you're not careful. But I told him forgiveness and trust are not the same repair job, and that trust, in my experience, gets rebuilt the way I used to rebuild an elevator system after a failure, slowly, joint by joint, tested at every stage, never rushed, no matter how badly everyone wants the thing running again. I invited him and Josephine, not Vanessa, not yet, down to Fairhope for a weekend in March. They came. Marcus stood in the doorway of my little rented house, near the water, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, and Josephine ran straight past both of us toward the workshop out back because she'd heard, somehow, through 5-year-old channels of information I will never fully understand, that Pop Pop had built a second dollhouse, and she needed, urgently, to see if it had a grandma painting too. It did. I watched my son watch his daughter's face when she found it, and something in his shoulders came down about 2 full inches, and he didn't say anything for a long minute. He just stood there in my workshop doorway with his hands in his pockets, looking at 31 years of careful work he'd apparently never once really looked at before. Then he said, "I didn't protect you, Dad," at that table. "I've thought about it every single day since." I told him I knew. I told him that was, in the end, the only part that had actually broken something in me, not the house, not the money, not even Vanessa's father's careless comment about old men and their upkeep costs. Just my son's silence. In the one moment, silence cost the most. He asked if I was coming home. I told him I was home. That Fairhope, unexpectedly, at 68 years old, with Carol's ashes scattered off a pier 2 blocks from my front door, and a waiting list of strangers wanting dollhouses built by a man who used to fix elevators, had become exactly that. But I told him Josephine was always welcome, every school break, every summer, for as long as she wanted to come, and that the door on my end, unlike the one at that dinner table in September, would never once be angled away from the family that actually showed up for it. That's the whole of it. An old man, a sold house, 2 dollhouses built 4 months apart for the same reason, and different ones, a bus ticket bought quietly on a Tuesday, and a granddaughter's drawing of a boat pinned now to the corkboard above my workbench, right next to a photograph of a woman with gray-streaked dark hair and a green cardigan, watching over the whole thing, exactly the way she always did. People sometimes call what I did running away. Some of you watching this might call it exactly that too, and I understand why. But I want to be honest with you, the way I've tried to be honest through this entire story. I didn't run from my family. I removed myself, carefully and on my own terms, from becoming a line item in someone else's spreadsheet, and I gave the people who genuinely loved me the room they needed to prove it, without a house, without an inheritance, without a single dollar sitting between us clouding the question. Some of them proved it. Some of them, I suspect, never will, and I've made a kind of peace with that too. If you've ever felt like your presence in a room was tolerated rather than wanted, if you've ever quietly become a number to people who used to know your name, I hope this reached you tonight. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if anyone in your life needs to hear that it's not too late to choose your own third option, send this to them. It costs you nothing. It might be exactly what they needed to hear. Take care of each other out there, and take care of yourselves too. Sometimes that has to come first.